Chapter 16, in which Fix does not seem to understand in the least what is said to him. The Rangoon, one of the Peninsular and Oriental Company's boats plying in the Chinese and Japanese seas, was a screw steamer, built of iron, weighing about 1,770 tons, and with engines of 400 horsepower. She was as fast, but not as well fitted up, as the Mongolia, and Ayuda was not as comfortably provided for on board her as Phileas Fogg could have wished. However, the trip from Calcutta to Hong Kong only comprised some 3,500 miles, occupying from 10 to 12 days, and the young woman was not difficult to please. During the first days of the journey, Ayuda became better acquainted with her protector, and constantly gave evidence of her deep gratitude for what he had done. The phlegmatic gentleman listened to her, apparently at least, with coldness, neither his voice nor his manner betraying the slightest emotion, but he seemed to be always on the watch that nothing should be wanting to Ayuda's comfort. He visited her regularly each day at certain hours, not so much to talk himself, as to sit and hear her talk. He treated her with the strictest politeness, but with the precision of an automaton, the movements of which had been arranged for this purpose. Ayuda did not quite know what to make of him, though Passepartout had given her some hints of his master's eccentricity, and made her smile by telling her of the wager which was sending him round the world. After all, she owed Phileas Fogg her life, and she always regarded him through the exalting medium of her gratitude. Ayuda confirmed the Parsi guide's narrative of her touching history. She did, indeed, belong to the highest of the native races of India. Many of the Parsi merchants have made great fortunes there by dealing in cotton. One of them, Sir Jamatsi Jijipoy, was made a baronet by the English government. Ayuda was a relative of this great man, and it was his cousin Gigi whom she hoped to join at Hong Kong. Whether she would find a protector in him she could not tell, but Mr. Fogg tried to calm her anxieties, and to assure her that everything would be mathematically. He used the very word arranged. Ayuda fastened her great eyes, clear as the sacred lakes of the Himalaya, upon him, but the intractable Fogg, as reserved as ever, did not seem at all inclined to throw himself into this lake. The first few days of the voyage passed happily, amid favorable weather and propitious winds, and the ship soon came in sight of the Great Andaman, the principal of the islands in the Bay of Bengal, with its picturesque Saddle Peak, 2,400 feet high, looming above the waters. The steamer passed along near the shores, but the savage Papuans, who are in the lowest scale of humanity, but are not, as has been asserted, cannibals, did not make their appearance. The panorama of the islands, as they steamed by them, was superb. Vast forests of palms, arex, bamboo, teakwood, of the gigantic mimosa and tree-like ferns covered the foreground. Behind, the graceful outlines of the mountains were traced against the sky, and along the coasts swarmed thousands of the precious swallows, whose nests furnish a luxurious dish to the tables of the celestial empire. The varied landscape afforded by the Andaman Islands was soon passed, however, and the Rangoon rapidly approached the Straits of Malacca, which give access to the China Seas. What was Detective Fix, so unluckily drawn on from country to country, doing all this while? He had managed to embark on the Rangoon at Calcutta without being seen by Passepartout, after leaving orders that, if the warrant should arrive, it should be forwarded to him at Hong Kong, and he hoped to conceal his presence to the end of the voyage. It would have been difficult to explain why he was on board without awakening Passepartout's suspicions, who thought him still at Bombay. But necessity impelled him, nevertheless, to renew his acquaintance with the worthy servant, as will be seen. All the detective's hopes and wishes were now centered on Hong Kong, for the steamer's stay at Singapore would be too brief to enable him to take any steps there. The arrest must be made at Hong Kong, or the robber would probably escape him forever. Hong Kong was the last English ground on which he would set foot. Beyond China, Japan, America offered to Fogg an almost certain refuge. If the warrant should at last make its appearance at Hong Kong, Fix could arrest him and be no further trouble. But beyond Hong Kong, a simple warrant would be of no avail. An extradition warrant would be necessary, and that would result in delays and obstacles, of which the rascal would take advantage to elude justice. Fix thought over these probabilities during the long hours which he spent in his cabin, and kept repeating to himself, "Now, either the warrant will be at Hong Kong, in which case I shall arrest my man, or it will not be there. This time it is absolutely necessary that I should delay his departure. I have failed at Bombay, and I have failed at Calcutta. If I fail at Hong Kong, my reputation is lost. Cost what it may, I must succeed. But how shall I prevent his departure if that should turn out to be my last resource? Fix made up his mind that, if worst came to worst, he would make a confidant of Passepartout and tell him what kind of a fellow his master really was. That Passepartout was not Fogg's accomplice, he was very certain. The servant, enlightened by his disclosure and afraid of being himself implicated in the crime, would doubtless become an ally of the detective. But this method was a dangerous one, only to be employed when everything else had failed. A word from Passepartout to his master would ruin all. The detective was therefore in a sore strait. But suddenly a new idea struck him. The presence of Aeuda on the Rangoon, in company with Phileas Fogg, gave him new material for reflection. Who was this woman? What combination of events had made her Fogg's traveling companion? They had evidently met somewhere between Bombay and Calcutta. But where? Had they met accidentally, or had Fogg gone into the interior purposely in quest of this charming damsel? Fix was fairly puzzled. He asked himself whether there had not been a wicked elopement. This idea so impressed itself upon his mind that he determined to make use of the supposed intrigue. Whether the young woman were married or not, he would be able to create such difficulties for Mr. Fogg at Hong Kong that he could not escape by paying any amount of money. But could he even wait till they reached Hong Kong? Fogg had an abominable way of jumping from one boat to another, and before anything could be effected, might get full underway again for Yokohama. Fix decided that he must warn the English authorities and signal the Rangoon before her arrival. This was easy to do since the steamer stopped at Singapore, where there is a telegraphic wire to Hong Kong. He finally resolved, moreover, before acting more positively, to question Passepartout. It would not be difficult to make him talk. As there was no time to lose, Fix prepared to make himself known. It was now the 30th of October, and on the following day the Rangoon was due at Singapore. Fix emerged from his cabin and went on deck. Passepartout was promenading up and down in the forward part of the steamer. The detective rushed forward with every appearance of extreme surprise, and exclaimed, "You here, on the Rangoon?" "What, Monsieur Fix, are you on board?" returned the really astonished Passepartout, recognizing his crony of the Mongolia. "Why, I left you at Bombay, and here you are on the way to Hong Kong. Are you going round the world too?" "No, no," replied Fix. "I shall stop at Hong Kong at least for some days." Said Passepartout, who seemed for an instant perplexed. "But how is it I have not seen you on board since we left Calcutta?" "Oh, a trifle of seasickness. I've been staying in my berth. The Gulf of Bengal does not agree with me, as well as the Indian Ocean. And how is Mr. Fogg?" "As well and as punctual as ever, not a day behind time. But, Monsieur Fix, you don't know that we have a young lady with us." "A young lady," replied the detective, not seeming to comprehend what was said. Passepartout thereupon recounted Aeuda's history, the affair at the Bombay Pagoda, the purchase of the elephant for £2,000, the rescue, the arrest and sentence of the Calcutta court, and the restoration of Mr. Fogg and himself to liberty on bail. Fix, who was familiar with the last events, seemed to be equally ignorant of all that Passepartout related, and the latter was charmed to find so interested a listener. "But does your master propose to carry this young woman to Europe?" "Not at all. We are simply going to place her under the protection of one of her relatives, a rich merchant at Hong Kong." "Nothing to be done there," said Fix to himself, concealing his disappointment. "A glass of gin, Mr. Passepartout." "Willingly, Monsieur Fix. We must at least have a friendly glass on board the Rangoon." Chapter 17. Showing what happened on the voyage from Singapore to Hong Kong. The detective and Passepartout met often on deck after this interview, though Fix was reserved, and did not attempt to induce his companion to divulge any more facts concerning Mr. Fogg. He caught a glimpse of that mysterious gentleman once or twice. But Mr. Fogg usually confined himself to the cabin, where he kept Aeuda company, or, according to his inveterate habit, took a hand at whist. Passepartout began very seriously to conjecture what strange chance kept Fix still on the route that his master was pursuing. It was really worth considering why this certainly very amiable and complacent person, whom he had first met at Suez, had then encountered on board the Mongolia, who disembarked at Bombay, which he announced as his destination, and now turned up so unexpectedly. On the Rangoon was following Mr. Fogg's tracks step by step. What was Fix's object? Passepartout was ready to wager his Indian shoes, which he religiously preserved, that Fix would also leave Hong Kong at the same time with them, and probably on the same steamer. Passepartout might have cudgeled his brain for a century without hitting upon the real object which the detective had in view. He never could have imagined that Phileas Fogg was being tracked as a robber around the globe. But as it is in human nature to attempt the solution of every mystery, Passepartout suddenly discovered an explanation of Fix's movements, which was in truth far from unreasonable. Fix, he thought, could only be an agent of Mr. Fogg's friends at the Reform Club, sent to follow him up, and to ascertain that he really went round the world as had been agreed upon. "It's clear," repeated the worthy servant to himself, proud of his shrewdness. "He's a spy sent to keep us in view. That isn't quite the thing either to be spying on Mr. Fogg, who is so honorable a man. Ah, gentlemen of the Reform, this shall cost you dear." Passepartout, enchanted with his discovery, resolved to say nothing to his master, lest he should be justly offended at this mistrust on the part of his adversaries. But he determined to chaff Fix, when he had the chance, with mysterious allusions, which, however, need not betray his real suspicions. During the afternoon of Wednesday, 30th October, the Rangoon entered the Strait of Malacca, which separates the peninsula of that name from Sumatra. The mountainous and craggy islets intercepted the beauties of this noble island from the view of the travelers. The Rangoon weighed anchor at Singapore the next day at 4 a.m. to receive coal, having gained half a day on the prescribed time of her arrival. Phileas Fogg noted this gain in his journal, and then, accompanied by Aeuta, who betrayed a desire for a walk on shore, disembarked. Fix, who suspected Mr. Fogg's every movement, followed them cautiously, without being himself perceived, while Passepartout, laughing in his sleeve at Fix's maneuvers, went about his usual errands. The island of Singapore is not imposing in aspect, for there are no mountains, yet its appearance is not without attractions. It is a park checkered by pleasant highways and avenues. A handsome carriage, drawn by a sleek pair of New Holland horses, carried Phileas Fogg and Aeuta into the midst of rows of palms with brilliant foliage, and of clover trees, whereof the cloves form the head of a half-open flower. Pepper plants replaced the prickly hedges of European fields. Sago bushes, large ferns with gorgeous branches, varied the aspect of this tropical clime. Nutmeg trees in full foliage filled the air with a penetrating perfume. Agile and grinning bands of monkeys skipped about in the trees, nor were tigers wanting in the jungles. After a drive of 2 hours through the country, Aeuta and Mr. Fogg returned to the town, which is a vast collection of heavy-looking, irregular houses, surrounded by charming gardens rich in tropical fruits and plants. At 10 o'clock they re-embarked, closely followed by the detective, who had kept them constantly in sight. Passepartout, who had been purchasing several dozen mangoes, a fruit as large as good-sized apples, of a dark brown color outside and a bright red within, and whose white pulp, melting in the mouth, affords gourmands a delicious sensation, was waiting for them on deck. He was only too glad to offer some mangoes to Aeuta, who thanked him very gracefully for them. At 11 o'clock the Rangoon rode out of Singapore harbor, and in a few hours the high mountains of Malacca, with their forests, inhabited by the most beautifully furred tigers in the world, were lost to view. Singapore is distant some 1,300 miles from the island of Hong Kong, which is a little English colony near the Chinese coast. Phileas Fogg hoped to accomplish the journey in 6 days, so as to be in time for the steamer which would leave on the 6th of November for Yokohama, the principal Japanese port. The Rangoon had a large quota of passengers, many of whom disembarked at Singapore, among them a number of Indians, Ceylonese, Chinamen, Malays, and Portuguese, mostly second-class travelers. The weather, which had hitherto been fine, changed with the last quarter of the moon. The sea rolled heavily, and the wind at intervals rose almost to a storm, but happily blew from the southwest, and thus aided the steamer's progress. The captain as often as possible put up his sails, and under the double action of steam and sail, the vessel made rapid progress along the coast of Annam and Cochin China. Owing to the defective construction of the Rangoon, however, unusual precautions became necessary in unfavorable weather. But the loss of time which resulted from this cause, while it nearly drove Passepartout out of his senses, did not seem to affect his master in the least. Passepartout blamed the captain, the engineer, and the crew, and consigned all who were connected with the ship to the land where the pepper grows. Perhaps the thought of the gas, which was remorselessly burning at his expense in Savile Row, had something to do with his hot impatience. "You are in a great hurry then," said Fix to him one day, "to reach Hong Kong." "A very great hurry." "Mr. Fogg, I suppose, is anxious to catch the steamer for Yokohama." "Terribly anxious." "You believe in this journey around the world, then?" "Absolutely, don't you, Mr. Fix?" I don't believe a word of it." "You're a sly dog," said Passepartout, winking at him. This expression rather disturbed Fix without his knowing why. Had the Frenchman guessed his real purpose, he knew not what to think, but how could Passepartout have discovered that he was a detective? Yet, in speaking as he did, the man evidently meant more than he expressed. Passepartout went still further the next day. He could not hold his tongue. "Mr. Fix," said he, in a bantering tone, "shall we be so unfortunate as to lose you when we get to Hong Kong?" "Why," responded Fix, a little embarrassed, "I don't know, perhaps." "Ah, if you would only go on with us. An agent of the Peninsular Company, you know, can't stop on the way. You were only going to Bombay, and here you are in China. America is not far off, and from America to Europe is only a step." Fix looked intently at his companion, whose countenance was as serene as possible, and laughed with him. But Passepartout persisted in chaffing him by asking him if he made much by his present occupation. "Yes and no," returned Fix. "There is good and bad luck in such things, but you must understand that I don't travel at my own expense." "Oh, I am quite sure of that," cried Passepartout, laughing heartily. Fix, fairly puzzled, descended to his cabin and gave himself up to his reflections. He was evidently suspected. Somehow or other the Frenchman had found out that he was a detective. But had he told his master? What part was he playing in all this? Was he an accomplice or not? Was the game, then, up? Fix spent several hours turning these things over in his mind, sometimes thinking that all was lost, then persuading himself that Fogg was ignorant of his presence, and then undecided what course it was best to take. Nevertheless, he preserved his coolness of mind, and at last resolved to deal plainly with Passepartout. If he did not find it practicable to arrest Fogg at Hong Kong, and if Fogg made preparations to leave that last foothold of English territory, he, Fix, would tell Passepartout all. Either the servant was the accomplice of his master, and in this case the master knew of his operations, and he should fail, or else the servant knew nothing about the robbery, and then his interest would be to abandon the robber. Such was the situation between Fix and Passepartout. Meanwhile Phileas Fogg moved about above them in the most majestic and unconscious indifference. He was passing methodically in his orbit around the world, regardless of the lesser stars which gravitated around him. Yet there was near by what the astronomers would call a disturbing star, which might have produced an agitation in this gentleman's heart. But no, the charms of Aeuta failed to act, to Passepartout's great surprise, and the disturbances, if they existed, would have been more difficult to calculate than those of Uranus which led to the discovery of Neptune. It was every day an increasing wonder to Passepartout, who read in Aeuta's eyes the depths of her gratitude to his master. Phileas Fogg, though brave and gallant, must be, he thought, quite heartless. As to the sentiment which this journey might have awakened in him, there was clearly no trace of such a thing, while poor Passepartout existed in perpetual reveries. One day he was leaning on the railing of the engine room and was observing the engine, when a sudden pitch of the steamer threw the screw out of the water. The steam came hissing out of the valves, and this made Passepartout indignant. "The valves are not sufficiently charged," he exclaimed. "We are not going. Oh, these English! If this was an American craft, we should blow up perhaps, but we should at all events go faster." Chapter 18. In which Phileas Fogg, Passepartout, and Fix go each about his business. The weather was bad during the latter days of the voyage. The wind, obstinately remaining in the northwest, blew a gale and retarded the steamer. The Rangoon rolled heavily, and the passengers became impatient of the long, monstrous waves which the wind raised before their path. A sort of tempest arose on the 3rd of November, the squall knocking the vessel about with fury and the waves running high. The Rangoon reefed all her sails, and even the rigging proved too much, whistling and shaking amid the squall. The steamer was forced to proceed slowly, and the captain estimated that she would reach Hong Kong 20 hours behind time, and more if the storm lasted. Phileas Fogg gazed at the tempestuous sea, which seemed to be struggling especially to delay him, with his habitual tranquility. He never changed countenance for an instant, though a delay of 20 hours, by making him too late for the Yokohama boat, would almost inevitably cause the loss of the wager. But this man of nerve manifested neither impatience nor annoyance. It seemed as if the storm were a part of his program, and had been foreseen. Ayuda was amazed to find him as calm as he had been from the first time she saw him. Fix did not look at the state of things in the same light. The storm greatly pleased him. His satisfaction would have been complete had the Rangoon been forced to retreat before the violence of wind and waves. Each delay filled him with hope, for it became more and more probable that Fogg would be obliged to remain some days at Hong Kong, and now the heavens themselves became his allies, with the gusts and squalls. It mattered not that they made him seasick, he made nothing of this inconvenience, and while his body was writhing under their effects, his spirit bounded with hopeful joy. Passepartout was enraged beyond expression by the unpropitious weather. Everything had gone so well till now, earth and sea had seemed to be at his master's service. Steamers and railways obeyed him. Wind and steam united to speed his journey. Had the hour of adversity come, Passepartout was as much excited as if the £20,000 were to come from his own pocket. The storm exasperated him, the gale made him furious, and he longed to lash the obstinate sea into obedience. Poor fellow, Fix carefully concealed from him his own satisfaction, for, had he betrayed it, Passepartout could scarcely have restrained himself from personal violence. Passepartout remained on deck as long as the tempest lasted, being unable to remain quiet below, and taking it into his head to aid the progress of the ship by lending a hand with the crew. He overwhelmed the captain, officers, and sailors, who could not help laughing at his impatience, with all sorts of questions. He wanted to know exactly how long the storm was going to last. He was referred to the barometer, which seemed to have no intention of rising. Passepartout shook it, but with no perceptible effect, for neither shaking nor maledictions could prevail upon it to change its mind. On the 4th, however, the sea became more calm and the storm lessened its violence. The wind veered southward and was once more favorable. Passepartout cleared up with the weather. Some of the sails were unfurled and the Rangoon resumed its most rapid speed. The time lost could not, however, be regained. Land was not signaled until 5 o'clock on the morning of the 6th. The steamer was due on the 5th. Phileas Fogg was 24 hours behind, and the Yokohama steamer would, of course, be missed. The pilot went on board at 6, and took his place on the bridge to guide the Rangoon through the channels to the port of Hong Kong. Passepartout longed to ask him if the steamer had left for Yokohama, but he dared not, for he wished to preserve the spark of hope, which still remained till the last moment. He had confided his anxiety to Fix, who, the sly rascal, tried to console him by saying that Mr. Fogg would be in time if he took the next boat. This only put Passepartout in a passion. Mr. Fogg, bolder than his servant, did not hesitate to approach the pilot, and tranquilly ask him if he knew when a steamer would leave Hong Kong for Yokohama. "At high tide tomorrow morning," answered the pilot. "Ah," said Mr. Fogg, without betraying any astonishment. Passepartout, who heard what passed, would willingly have embraced the pilot, while Fix would have been glad to twist his neck. "What is the steamer's name?" asked Mr. Fogg. "The Carnatic." "Ought she not to have gone yesterday?" "Yes, sir, but they had to repair one of her boilers, and so her departure was postponed till tomorrow." "Thank you," returned Mr. Fogg, descending mathematically to the saloon. Passepartout clasped the pilot's hand and shook it heartily in his delight, exclaiming, "Pilot, you are the best of good fellows." The pilot probably does not know to this day why his responses won him this enthusiastic greeting. He remounted the bridge and guided the steamer through the flotilla of junks, tonkas, and fishing boats which crowded the harbor of Hong Kong. At 1 o'clock, the Rangoon was at the quay, and the passengers were going ashore. Chance had strangely favored Phileas Fogg, for if the Carnatic had not been forced to lie over for repairing her boiler, she would have left on the 6th of November, and the passengers for Japan would have been obliged to wait a week for the sailing of the next steamer. Mr. Fogg was, it is true, 24 hours behind his time, but this could not seriously imperil the remainder of his tour. The steamer which crossed the Pacific from Yokohama to San Francisco made a direct connection with that from Hong Kong, and it could not sail until the latter reached Yokohama. If Mr. Fogg was 24 hours late on reaching Yokohama, this time would no doubt be easily regained in the voyage of 22 days across the Pacific. He found himself, then, about 24 hours behind time, 35 days after leaving London. The Carnatic was announced to leave Hong Kong at 5 the next morning. Mr. Fogg had 16 hours in which to attend to his business there, which was to deposit Aeuta safely with her wealthy relative. On landing, he conducted her to a palanquin, in which they repaired to the club hotel. A room was engaged for the young woman, and Mr. Fogg, after seeing that she wanted for nothing, set out in search of her cousin Gigi. He instructed Passepartout to remain at the hotel until his return, that Aeuta might not be left entirely alone. Mr. Fogg repaired to the exchange, where, he did not doubt, everyone would know so wealthy and considerable a person as the Parsi merchant. Meeting a broker, he made the inquiry to learn that Gigi had left China 2 years before, and retiring from business with an immense fortune had taken up his residence in Europe in Holland. The broker thought, with the merchants of which country he had principally traded. Phileas Fogg returned to the hotel, begged a moment's conversation with Aeuta, and without more ado, told her that Gigi was no longer at Hong Kong, but probably in Holland. Aeuta at first said nothing. She passed her hand across her forehead and reflected a few moments. Then, in her sweet, soft voice, she said, "What ought I to do, Mr. Fogg?" "It is very simple," responded the gentleman. "Go on to Europe." "But I cannot intrude." "You do not intrude, nor do you in the least embarrass my project. Passepartout." "Monsieur." "Go to the Carnatic, and engage 3 cabins." Passepartout, delighted that the young woman, who was very gracious to him, was going to continue the journey with them, went off at a brisk gait to obey his master's order. Chapter 19. In which Passepartout takes a too great interest in his master, and what comes of it. Hong Kong is an island which came into the possession of the English by the Treaty of Nankin, after the War of 1842, and the colonizing genius of the English has created upon it an important city and an excellent port. The island is situated at the mouth of the Canton River, and is separated by about 60 miles from the Portuguese town of Macau, on the opposite coast. Hong Kong has beaten Macau in the struggle for the Chinese trade, and now the greater part of the transportation of Chinese goods finds its depot at the former place. Docks, hospitals, wharves, a Gothic cathedral, a government house, macadamized streets, give to Hong Kong the appearance of a town in Kent or Surrey transferred by some strange magic to the Antipodes. Passepartout wandered with his hands in his pockets towards the Victoria port, gazing as he went at the curious palanquins and other modes of conveyance, and the groups of Chinese, Japanese, and Europeans who passed to and fro in the streets. Hong Kong seemed to him not unlike Bombay, Calcutta, and Singapore, since, like them, it betrayed everywhere the evidence of English supremacy. At the Victoria port he found a confused mass of ships of all nations: English, French, American, and Dutch, men of war and trading vessels, Japanese and Chinese junks, sempas, tonkas, and flower boats, which formed so many floating parterres. Passepartout noticed in the crowd a number of the natives who seemed very old and were dressed in yellow. On going into a barber's to get shaved, he learned that these ancient men were all at least 80 years old, at which age they are permitted to wear yellow, which is the imperial color. Passepartout, without exactly knowing why, thought this very funny. On reaching the quay where they were to embark on the Carnatic, he was not astonished to find Fix walking up and down. The detective seemed very much disturbed and disappointed. "This is bad," muttered Passepartout, "for the gentleman of the Reform Club." He accosted Fix with a merry smile, as if he had not perceived that gentleman's chagrin. The detective had, indeed, good reasons to inveigh against the bad luck which pursued him. The warrant had not come. It was certainly on the way, but as certainly it could not now reach Hong Kong for several days. This being the last English territory on Mr. Fogg's route, the robber would escape, unless he could manage to detain him. "Well, Monsieur Fix," said Passepartout, "have you decided to go with us as far as America?" "Yes," returned Fix, through his set teeth. "Good," exclaimed Passepartout, laughing heartily. "I knew you could not persuade yourself to separate from us. Come and engage your berth." They entered the steamer office and secured cabins for 4 persons. The clerk, as he gave them the tickets, informed them that, the repairs on the Carnatic having been completed, the steamer would leave that very evening, and not next morning, as had been announced. "That will suit my master all the better," said Passepartout. "I will go and let him know." Fix now decided to make a bold move. He resolved to tell Passepartout all. It seemed to be the only possible means of keeping Phileas Fogg several days longer at Hong Kong. He accordingly invited his companion into a tavern which caught his eye on the quay. On entering, they found themselves in a large room handsomely decorated, at the end of which was a large camp furnished with cushions. Several persons lay upon this bed in a deep sleep. At the small tables which were arranged about the room, some 30 customers were drinking English beer, porter, gin and brandy, smoking, the while long red clay pipes stuffed with little balls of opium mingled with essence of rose. From time to time one of the smokers, overcome with the narcotic, would slip under the table, whereupon the waiters, taking him by the head and feet, carried and laid him upon the bed. The bed already supported 20 of these stupefied sots. Fix and Passepartout saw that they were in a smoking house, haunted by those wretched, cadaverous, idiotic creatures to whom the English merchants sell every year the miserable drug called opium, to the amount of £1,400,000. Thousands devoted to one of the most despicable vices which afflict humanity. The Chinese government has in vain attempted to deal with the evil by stringent laws. It passed gradually from the rich, to whom it was at first exclusively reserved, to the lower classes, and then its ravages could not be arrested. Opium is smoked everywhere at all times, by men and women, in the Celestial Empire. Once accustomed to it, the victims cannot dispense with it, except by suffering horrible bodily contortions and agonies. A great smoker can smoke as many as 8 pipes a day, but he dies in 5 years. It was in one of these dens that Fix and Passepartout, in search of a friendly glass, found themselves. Passepartout had no money, but willingly accepted Fix's invitation in the hope of returning the obligation at some future time. They ordered 2 bottles of port, to which the Frenchman did ample justice, while Fix observed him with close attention. They chatted about the journey, and Passepartout was especially merry at the idea that Fix was going to continue it with them. When the bottles were empty, however, he rose to go and tell his master of the change in the time of the sailing of the Carnatic. Fix caught him by the arm and said, "Wait a moment." "What for, Mr. Fix?" "I want to have a serious talk with you." "A serious talk," cried Passepartout, drinking up the little wine that was left in the bottom of his glass. "Well, we'll talk about it tomorrow. I haven't time now." "Stay, what I have to say concerns your master." Passepartout at this looked attentively at his companion. Fix's face seemed to have a singular expression. He resumed his seat. "What is it that you have to say?" Fix placed his hand upon Passepartout's arm, and lowering his voice said, "You have guessed who I am." "Parbleu," said Passepartout, smiling. "Then I'm going to tell you everything." "Now that I know everything, my friend." "Ah, that's very good. But go on, go on. First, though, let me tell you that those gentlemen have put themselves to a useless expense." "Useless," said Fix. "You speak confidently. It's clear that you don't know how large the sum is." "Of course I do," returned Passepartout. £20,000. "55,000, answered Fix, pressing his companion's hand. "What?" cried the Frenchman. "Has Monsieur Fogg dared £55,000? Well, there's all the more reason for not losing an instant," he continued, getting up hastily. Fix pushed Passepartout back in his chair and resumed, £55,000, and if I succeed, I get £2,000. If you'll help me, I'll let you have 500 of them." "Help you?" cried Passepartout, whose eyes were standing wide open. "Yes, help me keep Mr. Fogg here for 2 or 3 days." "Why, what are you saying? Those gentlemen are not satisfied with following my master and suspecting his honor, but they must try to put obstacles in his way. I blush for them." "What do you mean?" "I mean that it is a piece of shameful trickery. They might as well waylay Mr. Fogg and put his money in their pockets." "That's just what we count on doing." "It's a conspiracy, then," cried Passepartout, who became more and more excited as the liquor mounted in his head, for he drank without perceiving it. "A real conspiracy, And gentlemen too, bah. Fix began to be puzzled. Members of the Reform Club, continued Passepartout, you must know, Monsieur Fix, that my master is an honest man, and that, when he makes a wager, he tries to win it fairly. But who do you think I am? Asked Fix, looking at him intently. Parbleu, an agent of the members of the Reform Club, sent out here to interrupt my master's journey. But though I found you out some time ago, I've taken good care to say nothing about it to Mr. Fogg. He knows nothing, then? Nothing, replied Passepartout, again emptying his glass. The detective passed his hand across his forehead, hesitating before he spoke again. What should he do? Passepartout's mistake seemed sincere, but it made his design more difficult. It was evident that the servant was not the master's accomplice, as Fix had been inclined to suspect. Well, said the detective to himself, as he is not an accomplice, he will help me. He had no time to lose. Fogg must be detained at Hong Kong, so he resolved to make a clean breast of it. Listen to me, said Fix abruptly. I am not, as you think, an agent of the members of the Reform Club. Bah, retorted Passepartout, with an air of raillery. I am a police detective, sent out here by the London office. You a detective? I will prove it, here is my commission. Passepartout was speechless with astonishment when Fix displayed this document, the genuineness of which could not be doubted. Mr. Fogg's wager, resumed Fix, is only a pretext, of which you and the gentlemen of the Reform are dupes. He had a motive for securing your innocent complicity. But why? Listen, on the 28th of last September, a robbery of £55,000 was committed at the Bank of England by a person whose description was fortunately secured. Here is this description. It answers exactly to that of Mr. Phileas Fogg. What nonsense, cried Passepartout, striking the table with his fist. My master is the most honorable of men. How can you tell? You know scarcely anything about him. You went into his service the day he came away, and he came away on a foolish pretext, without trunks, and carrying a large amount in banknotes. And yet you are bold enough to assert that he is an honest man. Yes, yes, repeated the poor fellow mechanically. Would you like to be arrested as his accomplice? Passepartout, overcome by what he had heard, held his head between his hands, and did not dare to look at the detective. Phileas Fogg, the savior of Aehuta, that brave and generous man, a robber, and yet how many presumptions there were against him. Passepartout tried to reject the suspicions which forced themselves upon his mind. He did not wish to believe that his master was guilty. Well, what do you want of me? He said at last with an effort. See here, replied Fix. I have tracked Mr. Fogg to this place, but as yet I have failed to receive the warrant of arrest for which I sent to London. You must help me to keep him here in Hong Kong. I will share with you the £2,000 reward offered by the Bank of England. Never, replied Passepartout, who tried to rise but fell back, exhausted in mind and body. Mr. Fix, he stammered, even should what you say be true, if my master is really the robber you are seeking for, which I deny I am in his service. I have seen his generosity and goodness, and I will never betray him, not for all the gold in the world. I come from a village where they don't eat that kind of bread. You refuse. I refuse. Consider that I've said nothing, said Fix, and let us drink. Yes, let us drink. Passepartout felt himself yielding more and more to the effects of the liquor. Fix, seeing that he must, at all hazards, be separated from his master, wished to entirely overcome him. Some pipes full of opium lay upon the table. Fix slipped one into Passepartout's hand. He took it, put it between his lips, lit it, drew several puffs, and his head, becoming heavy under the influence of the narcotic, fell upon the table. At last, said Fix, seeing Passepartout unconscious, Mr. Fogg will not be informed of the Carnatic's departure, and if he is, he will have to go without this cursed Frenchman. And after paying his bill, Fix left the tavern. Chapter 20. In which Fix comes face to face with Phileas Fogg. While these events were passing at the opium house, Mr. Fogg, unconscious of the danger he was in of losing the steamer, was quietly escorting Aehuta about the streets of the English quarter, making the necessary purchases for the long voyage before them. It was all very well for an Englishman like Mr. Fogg to make the tour of the world with a carpet-bag. A lady could not be expected to travel comfortably under such conditions. He acquitted his task with characteristic serenity, and invariably replied to the objections of his fair companion, who was confused by his patience and generosity. "It is in the interest of my journey, a part of my program." The purchases made, they returned to the hotel, where they dined at a sumptuously served table d'hôte, after which Aehuda, shaking hands with her protector after the English fashion, retired to her room for rest. Mr. Fogg absorbed himself throughout the evening in the perusal of the Times and Illustrated London News. Had he been capable of being astonished at anything, it would have been not to see his servant return at bedtime. But knowing that the steamer was not to leave for Yokohama until the next morning, he did not disturb himself about the matter. When Passepartout did not appear the next morning to answer his master's bell, Mr. Fogg, not betraying the least vexation, contented himself with taking his carpet-bag, calling Aehuda, and sending for a palanquin. It was then 8 o'clock. At 9:30, it being then high tide, the Carnatic would leave the harbor. Mr. Fogg and Aehuda got into the palanquin, their luggage being brought after on a wheelbarrow, and half an hour later stepped upon the quay where they were to embark. Mr. Fogg then learned that the Carnatic had sailed the evening before. He had expected to find not only the steamer but his servant, and was forced to give up both. But no sign of disappointment appeared on his face, and he merely remarked to Aehuda, "It is an accident, madam, nothing more." At this moment a man who had been observing him attentively approached. It was Fix, who, bowing, addressed Mr. Fogg. "Were you not, like me, sir, a passenger on the Rangoon which arrived yesterday?" "I was, sir," replied Mr. Fogg coldly, "but I have not the honor." "Pardon me, I thought I should find your servant here." "Do you know where he is, sir?" asked Aehuda anxiously. "What?" responded Fix, feigning surprise. "Is he not with you?" "No," said Aehuda. "He has not made his appearance since yesterday. Could he have gone on board the Carnatic without us?" "Without you, madam," answered the detective. "Excuse me, did you intend to sail in the Carnatic?" "Yes, sir." "So did I, madam, and I am excessively disappointed. The Carnatic, its repairs being completed, left Hong Kong 12 hours before the stated time, without any notice being given. We must now wait a week for another steamer." As he said a week, Fix felt his heart leap for joy. Fogg detained at Hong Kong for a week. There would be time for the warrant to arrive, and fortune at last favored the representative of the law. His horror may be imagined when he heard Mr. Fogg say, in his placid voice, "But there are other vessels besides the Carnatic, it seems to me, in the harbor of Hong Kong." And offering his arm to Aehuda, he directed his steps towards the docks in search of some craft about to start. Fix, stupefied, followed. It seemed as if he were attached to Mr. Fogg by an invisible thread. Chance, however, appeared really to have abandoned the man it had hitherto served so well. For 3 hours Phileas Fogg wandered about the docks, with the determination, if necessary, to charter a vessel to carry him to Yokohama, but he could only find vessels which were loading or unloading, and which could not therefore set sail. Fix began to hope again. But Mr. Fogg, far from being discouraged, was continuing his search, resolved not to stop if he had to resort to Macau, when he was accosted by a sailor on one of the wharves. "Is your honor looking for a boat? Have you a boat ready to sail?" "Yes, your honor, a pilot boat, number 43, the best in the harbor." "Does she go fast?" "Between 8 and 9 knots the hour. Will you look at her?" "Yes." "Your honor will be satisfied with her. Is it for a sea excursion?" "No, for a voyage." "A voyage?" "Yes, will you agree to take me to Yokohama?" The sailor leaned on the railing, opened his eyes wide, and said, "Is your honor joking?" "No, I have missed the Carnatic, and I must get to Yokohama by the 14th at the latest, to take the boat for San Francisco." "I am sorry," said the sailor, "but it is impossible. I offer you £100 per day, and an additional reward of £200 if I reach Yokohama in time." "Are you in earnest?" "Very much so." The pilot walked away a little distance, and gazed out to sea, evidently struggling between the anxiety to gain a large sum and the fear of venturing so far. Fix was in mortal suspense. Mr. Fogg turned to Ayuda and asked her, "You would not be afraid, would you, madam?" "Not with you, Mr. Fogg," was her answer. The pilot now returned, shuffling his hat in his hands. "Well, pilot," said Mr. Fogg. "Well, your honor," replied he, "I could not risk myself, my men, or my little boat of scarcely 20 tons on so long a voyage at this time of year. Besides, we could not reach Yokohama in time, for it is 1,660 miles from Hong Kong." "Only 1,600, said Mr. Fogg. "It's the same thing." Fix breathed more freely. "But," added the pilot, "it might be arranged another way." Fix ceased to breathe at all. "How?" asked Mr. Fogg. "By going to Nagasaki, at the extreme south of Japan, or even to Shanghai, which is only 800 miles from here. In going to Shanghai, we should not be forced to sail wide of the Chinese coast, which would be a great advantage, as the currents run northward and would aid us." "Pilot," said Mr. Fogg, "I must take the American steamer at Yokohama, and not at Shanghai or Nagasaki." "Why not?" returned the pilot. "The San Francisco steamer does not start from Yokohama. It puts in at Yokohama and Nagasaki, but it starts from Shanghai." "You are sure of that?" "Perfectly." "And when does the boat leave Shanghai?" "On the 11th, at 7 in the evening. We have therefore 4 days before us, that is 96 hours. And in that time, if we had good luck and a southwest wind, and the sea was calm, we could make those 800 miles to Shanghai." "And you could go?" "In an hour, as soon as provisions could be got aboard and the sails put up." "It is a bargain. Are you the master of the boat?" "Yes, John Bunsby, master of the Tankadere."